Hi, my name is Jason Kraus. I'm a student at Concordia University studying organizational leadership. This presentation is a copy of my thesis defense. It is provided to Concordia University students and faculty so they can review it and learn from it, hopefully. This is our agenda we'll be going through during the presentation. There should be a copy of the PowerPoint in the email that was sent to you. What is this thesis about? What is my thesis about? It is the question that drove my research is transformational leadership or servant leadership more effective in recruiting and retaining union members? I'll restate that again. Is transformational leadership or servant leadership more effective in recruiting and retaining union members? So why is this important? Well, in 2015 in Wisconsin, a bill aptly named the Right to Work was passed, and under the Right to Work law, union members do not need to pay dues anymore. In the past, when they worked at a company that was covered by the union, it was mandatory for them to pay dues. Now, under the Right to Work laws, it is no longer mandatory for employees to pay dues, but the union still needs to represent all the employees under the collective bargaining agreement. So this will lead to a loss in contributions and member involvement, but still leave the union with the liability to collective bargain and support all the union members. So why is this important? Mainly, to me, it is because I am a union member. I've been a union member for the last 19 years. I'm a member of Local 2-209. Local 2-209 of the Steelworkers is the union that represents the employees at Harley-Davidson's powertrain operations in Menominee Falls. So the scope of this will be to only look at servant leadership and transformational leadership. Also, the information contained in the peer-reviewed articles will not be disputed or contested, and the study will not contribute a specific action plan to the union leaders. It is only to really research if servant and transformational leadership is a viable option. The methodology, well, I'll explain kind of the methodology in the rest of this presentation kind of as a storyline on how it kind of unfolded and how I led to my conclusions. First of all, the question that started this is how can servant leadership help guide union leaders in a changing environment? My undergraduate work was done at Wisconsin Lutheran College, and part of their college foundation is servant leadership. So I wanted to try to use servant leadership in solving a problem that was prevalent in my life, and that was the changing environment of the union. So I started with a case study approach by using multiple sources. I was going to go out and get all kinds of sources about servant leadership and apply them to union leadership. Well, that's not exactly what was out there. When I started looking at union leadership, transformational leadership came up more times than not. There was a small amount of servant leadership research done, and especially done in Wisconsin, and so my research methods changed to a grounded theory approach where examinations were collected to evaluate the methods of both of them. So my research now is looking at servant leadership and transformational leadership, and I used a qualitative study, and by looking at quantitative peer-reviewed research. So to start my research, I first found out what is servant leadership and what is transformational leadership, what are their definitions, what are their descriptions. Then looked at, are the styles present in unions, and how do they work in the union environment. Then, once I understood those, I found a study that looked at the interaction between servant leadership and transformational leadership. But as I was looking back at all the research, a lot of it focused on the leader. So I started to ask the question, well, how does servant leadership and how does transformational leadership look like from the follower? So to make this methodology a lot clearer, I've got a project flow chart, and we'll be using this throughout the presentation. So on top is the question that's driving all of this. It is transformational leadership or servant leadership more effective in recruiting and retaining union members? Then we'll start down the servant leadership side, and I'll go through the servant leadership kind of definitions. I hate to use it more of a definition, but the descriptions of servant leadership and the two studies I used to define servant leadership in unions. First of all, I used Greenleaf's research. He is the forefather of servant leadership. Most of everyone who starts their research on servant leadership references his works. The first work that they reference is Servant as a Leader. It was a small pamphlet, about 30-some pages in the 70s, and then it was redone into a book that I had used, The Servant Leadership, A Journey into the Nature of Legitimate Power and Greatness. Both of these books contributed to understanding what a servant leader is. The servant leader focuses on the individual to remove barriers so that the individual can succeed. If the individual succeeds, then they will give back and join in more to the organizational beliefs and the leader's beliefs. One of the statements you hear a lot when, according to servant leadership, is a servant leader is servant first, which is sharply different from a person who is a leader first. So what Greenleaf's trying to say is focus on the individual first before you focus on the organization. And 5 traits that kind of describe what a servant leader is, and these 5 traits are used in the research of several people used in my study to quantify if the leaders are servants or not. First is a altruistic calling, a leader's deep-rooted desire to bring about a positive difference in the change in others. As you can see, that reverts to the individual. Empathy and healing and listening skills. Wisdom, the ability to take cues from the environment and understand the consequences. Even though the leader is devoting their skills and their focus towards the individual, they still need to lead and look forward and be able to guide people into new territories. Persuasive mapping is the extent to which a leader applies sound reasoning and mental frameworks. And organizational stewardship, the ability to create a community spirit in the workplace. So, how was servant leadership displayed in the union environment? The servant leadership and environment, I used the employee leadership style and roles after the implementation of Act 10 by Joanne Atkins. This is a very interesting study because it was done with manufacturing companies in Wisconsin after Act 10, but prior to the Right to Work bill. So it got a snapshot of leaders in the private sector that were going to experience the change coming up. So they were already starting to change their views on how to handle the new law coming down. And some of the things that she had found is servant leaders demonstrated their commitment, stewardship, and led the members by genuinely caring about their issues. And the union leaders showed genuine caring by listening, empathy, showing trust, and instilling a vision of the future. The next study that was used was by Patrick Duncan, and it's perceived servant leadership attributes, union commitment, and union member participation. he looked at really 3 different questions. The first question do union leaders have the 5 attributes of servant leadership? In this order they were found: wisdom, organizational stewardship, persuasive mapping, altruistic calling, and emotional healing. The altruistic calling and emotional healing are lower in this study, and Duncan states that they're lower because of the nature of the union being a organizational or organizational goal focused, not an individual goal focused organization. So they're saying that the union members feel the leaders are more focused on the organization than they are on their personal needs. So when they are asked, the union members are asked, well, how do they exhibit their commitment to the union? And they stated the first is belief in unionism, union loyalty, willingness to work for the union, but they rejected the responsibility to the union, the collective over the individual, kind of affirming the first question that they believe that the individual is more important than the organizational goals. The third question focused around member participation, which they stated that they engaged in speaking well of the union and contributed to political causes and encouragement of other union members, meeting attendance, and reporting violations were last, mainly because those 2 required more time and effort to commit to than it would have the engaging in speaking positively of the union. So to kind of wrap up Duncan's research is that he found the aspects of servant leadership in his study, but he also understands that the union members want to be taken care of on the personal level. They don't necessarily agree to just giving everything in the organization, and whatever is good for the organization is good for them. So that leads to servant leadership being effective because servant leadership focuses on the individual. So now we'll move over to the transformational leadership side with a description and a union study. Transformational leadership means to alter the system entirely, and this work is done by out of the book Transforming Leadership by James Gregory Burns. And when he talks about transformational leadership, he thinks of changing everything, a big societal change. So comprehensive and persuasive, a new culture and value system take place of the old. So it's really a new frontier. We're going to change everything, and everything is going to be better. And that's what how the transformational leader leads is he kind of sells that the participation in a change will bring intense feeling of self-worth and self-efficiency, creating a sense of meaningfulness in the followers' work and lives. The leader and follower then create a dynamic interaction where the follower starts to contribute to the organizational goal. So the transformational leadership will tell the follower on how what needs to be done, we'll say, and what great things could happen if we just change some laws or if we work towards something, and the transformational follower will buy in and become active towards achieving those goals. So how does this work in a union environment? Well, that was looked at as Nicholas Twigg, Brian Fuller, and Kim Hester's research of transformational leadership in labor organizations, the effect of union citizenship behaviors. And this study studied oil refinery workers, and what they had found is analyzed the transformation transformational leadership against these questions. Are there perceived union support from the leaders, obligation towards the union, trust of the officials, union-based self-esteem, union commitment, and union citizenship? The study discovered there was a relationship between the organizational support and the organizational attachment, meaning that if the leader and follower, if the follower felt the leader was supporting them towards goals that they had felt, they then in turn would support the organization. Kind of how I explained it originally. So this proved evidence to support the view of what unions fostered commitment and supportive behavior by meeting the members' self-enhancement needs. This is kind of an interesting wording that the study uses, as self-enhancement needs, because when I read self-enhancement, it really refers me back to the servant leadership, and that's a little bit of a thing that we'll get into is where the follower falls in accordance with transformational leadership and servant leadership. So now we'll kind of move along to the comparison of servant leadership and transformational leadership with Mutha and Christian's study. This study is very interesting because I'll say, the title is Servant Leadership and Commitment, the Role of Transformational Leadership. And this study favored transformational leadership, I'll say, in their research. Excuse me. So, using this chart here, I'll kind of move off to the side, is this line here is low transformational leadership. And what they found in the study is if a leader has low amounts of transformational leadership, if they increase the amount of servant leadership, that the commitment of the follower will increase. But what they also found is that if the person has high transformational leadership skills, if the leader is very focused to the goals of the organization, we'll say, the increase in servant leadership by the leader actually declines the amount of commitment that the follower has. So that's a very interesting state, that if the leader isn't connected to the organizational vision, then if they focus on the individual's commitment will increase. But if the leader is very organizational focused, that servant leadership focusing on the individual actually takes away from the focus of the organization. So now, that being said, how does it look from a follower's point of view? That study just stated that if the leader is transformational, that doesn't necessarily mean that the followers are going to be servant or transformational just because the leader is. So the study, the transformational versus servant leadership, a difference in leader focus, states that, basically the transformational and servant leaders are complete ideologies. They are full aspect leadership styles, very well developed and very well connected with their followers and used all over the world. The leaders in both generate a high level of trust. They serve as role models. They show consideration to others and empower followers. When you start to look at these, there is a lot of overlap in the two and how they are effective. Just because you're an organization, just because you're a transformational leader and are focusing on the organization, it doesn't mean you necessarily don't look at some of the personal aspects of the follower. Or servant leadership, the whole goal of servant leadership is to connect to the follower and then get them so involved that they will connect to the organizational benefits. So they both have the same goal to benefit the overall organization. They just go about it through different means. And these two different means are servant leadership focuses on the personal aspects of the follower, and the transformational leader focuses on the objectives of the organization. In this case, the objective of the organization would be the union causes. So that kind of brings me to the conclusion. How does this all really matter in the aspect of Local 2-209 in the union leaders moving forward in the changing environment? Well, the research that I've gone through real quickly here is that 4 things were found. First of all, that servant and transformational leaderships were present and useful in the union environment. Second, servant leadership is effective when transformational leadership is low. Third, leaders with high transformational leadership skills mitigate the effects of servant leadership. That was found in the chart we have, but also Duncan had brought it, and that they had said that union loyalty mitigated any of the servant leader attributes in his study also. So that was interesting. It was proved in 2 different cases. And lastly, how much the follower believes in the organizational goals affects which leadership style will be effective. And this is really the culmination of this work, is how much the believer believes in organizational goals affects which leadership style will be effective. If a union member, let's say, if a union member is committed to the union organization and what the union stands for, they will be highly responsive to transformational leaders. So if an employee, a new employee who doesn't have any union involvement or doesn't know a lot about the union and really wants to know what's in it for them, the servant leader will connect to them better. So going forward, is the right to work legislation changed what traditional leadership styles were. Traditionally, when it was compulsory to join the union, and no matter what, you joined the union and had to pay dues, transformational leader was the way to go, because it was about the union, because you had to join the union. It was about the bigger picture, the bigger goals. Then now with the changing environment, that throws that into question, and it leads to oneself looking at how things are done. Servant and transformational leadership may seem polar at first, but they want to eventually get to the same point of the followers joining in moving the organizational forward. Further investigation of their objectives and methods shares very similarities and what they are, but what needs to be done is that the leaders need to listen and understand where the followers are and meet the followers where they are. If a transformational leader addresses an individual who is thinking, what is the union going to do for me on a personal level, it'll basically fall on deaf ears. If a person is committed to the union environment and they understand it, a servant leader message will not be as effective as shown in the study. So at worst, it'll be ineffective. At best, it'll offend the person or the follower. So in the changing environment, leaders need to know what their followers and what the agenda of the followers are, so they can apply either servant leader or transformational leadership, because both have proven to be effective in the union environment. Here are the references I used. It will be available in the PowerPoint provided. I'd like to thank you for watching my presentation and your service to the professions. And if you have any questions, please email me at the email provided with this link. Thank you.